Good
welcome
morning,
back.
people.
Sorry about
Yes.
we're a little late. We had a technical difficulty. Olivier forgot to take his meds this morning. So,
No, I took the. No, no, that's not true. See, you're already like inventing stuff. I took the wrong meds because I don't take meds, so I just pick stuff. Like, right?
yeah. Yeah, you have a
Anyway.
big bowl, right? You just reach your hand in and whatever you grab. That's what I do. So, I hope everyone had a happy Thanksgiving and the leftovers are all eaten. I know they are in our house. If they're not eaten by now, you should probably think about getting rid of them because
No,
uh,
too early.
too early. I like to leave mine until it becomes a science experiment in the refrigerator. That's always a
Well,
good sign.
I like to leave mine until it start moving by itself.
Ah, yes,
That means
yes.
there's life, and it's like,
Uh-huh.
I'm ready to eat that and to
Yep.
fight with those things that are working around on my table or my fridge.
Yes.
So, which lead to
You're not going to believe this, but we have some questions today about food. And
yeah, it's going to be hard to believe for people, but
yeah.
like,
I used to get a question quite a lot in my career because I was a buyer for many years at
that.
Dean and DeLuca in New York, and we sold very, very good food, very what was called fancy food. In
No,
fact,
it was called
well,
gourmet food, right?
gourmet. Yeah, we never liked the word gourmet very much because it was overused. And it's a perfectly good
Already
word.
then, already
Yeah,
then. Wow,
already back then in the 80s, it was so
that's crazy.
overused.
See, yeah, right, right.
And it's a good word. It's a good word, but it's been misinterpreted, overused. Like I said, I mean, what it really means is a gourmet. A gourmet is someone. I believe it's a French word, maybe German, maybe
No,
Thai. I'm not sure.
it's from gourmand,
Yeah, it
gourmandise.
yeah. It basically refers to a person who is very discriminating about what they eat. That they're very interested in flavor and taste
Right,
more than
right, right.
quantity.
More than eating food, like it's
More
more
than
about the
just filling your
experience.
stomach. They want to engage their senses and and so people would ask me, they say, well, why, this is just fancy food for fancy occasions. We eat real food. And then I'd find out the real food they were eating was, came out of a box. And so anyway, we're going to talk about that today. We've got one question is basically, what is gourmet? What is gourmet, and why is it more expensive?
And I would respond to that. And yes, we need to discuss the gourmet aspect of it. But I would answer to that question, why is good food so expensive? I would say, why is crappy food so cheap? I
Yeah,
think this is where we need to start with because people are used to not spending money on food, and then you give them the real price, and it's like, whoa, no,
right,
that's the price. Actually, that's the price.
right. And the reason,
Connoisseur, yeah,
connoisseur,
from from
the
connaissance, which
French,
is knowledge.
yeah, it's too bad the French don't have a word for connoisseur because it's such a great word. Um, anyway, yeah. So, what were we saying? Gourmet food. Why is it? Why is
Gourmet.
and why is crappy food so inexpensive, so cheap? Well, they developed ways to process food and to raise animals and to grow crops. They developed ways through technology to be able to do it very quickly and cheaply. So in other words, if you're growing vegetables and you have to go out in your garden every day, I mean, this is a really small example, but if you go out in your garden every day and you have to weed and you have to water and you have to tend to your plants, and then when it comes time to pick them, you go out there and harvest them by hand and collect them in your little basket and take them into your
Right.
kitchen.
And
Well, in
so,
commercial agriculture, the crops are all genetically modified and bred so that they resist uh, pests and things like that they don't need as much water. And then uh, they have machinery, and also so that they're very easy to harvest. So they can go through with machines and harvest things much more rapidly than you can by hand. Well, on the surface, that seems like it would be a good thing because you could get a lot more food a lot quicker, a lot cheaper. You can feed a lot more people. But the price of that is that, well, in agriculture, you've got monoculture. We've talked about this before, that it's destroying the topsoil. It's
Yeah,
destroying,
right. Yeah,
which then
exactly.
birds, which, it's a whole ecosystem that is in danger when you start growing crops that way. And in terms of animals, animals are raised not with the welfare of the animal in mind, but by how quickly they can put meat on the animal,
Yeah, and how
and
much, right?
and
And
how
how
much
much?
how much meat per animal. So if you shoot them up with hormones and steroids and stuff, I don't know about steroids, but they use a lot of hormones in factory meat production so that the animals bulk up and they gain a lot of weight and they put on a lot of mass so that each animal produces a lot more meat.
Or look at chicken.
Or in some cases milk. In the dairy industry, it's about milk.
Look
So
at chicken breasts today. They're like
yeah,
turkey, right?
yeah. And chickens are raised in a way that is a horror show for the chickens, but it produces, you can buy chicken for, a couple bucks a pound, at your grocery store, and it's plentiful and it's cheap. It doesn't taste like much. Those chickens that are raised that way, they have no flavor. I mean, um, I used to know, when some of my older relatives were still around, they talked about how, chickens that you buy at the supermarket just didn't taste like chickens. They didn't taste
I
like
know,
the
right?
chickens that they grew up with.
Right. Oh yeah, that's crazy. I mean, really.
I
Guys,
remember.
I know I'm fishing around for stuff. I'm sorry, James.
That's okay.
I'm recycling today, so I got some really good wagyu ground.
Nice.
Ooh, you can't see my. Got it. There you go. Ah,
Very,
no, you
very
can
nice.
still cannot read it. Okay, whatever.
It's backwards.
I know it's weird. I
How did
just
they
put
print
my.
it that way? How did you
That
know
is
what you were buying if it's backwards? You're able to read backwards, huh?
this.
Um, anyway,
Anyway, all right. So I'm just recycling. So I'm just cutting some onions. I'm gonna cook that. This is all meat I found in the fridge. So some chicken, some ground meat. I'm just gonna cook it in that gently and have some food later. All right. So anyway,
okay. So I remember one of the first times I went to France many, many, many
Chef
years
Vito,
ago.
who's that?
Chef Vilo.
Who's that?
Oh, Chef Olive backwards. It's your name backwards.
Oh, good to know.
Yeah. So I went to
Good to know.
one of my
Sorry.
earliest trips to France. I remember eating chicken there, and eating a chicken from Bresse, which is a place in France
Oh,
that's
le
famous for
poulet de
its
Brest.
chickens.
Le poulet de
Oh my
Brest, right?
God, it was a revelation. It was like,
Yeah,
wow,
yeah.
this is what chicken is supposed to taste like.
And the name is poulet fermier, which
Right.
here is kind of the same, right?
Yeah.
What is
Here they would call it free range chicken or
from a
natural
farm?
chickens. Yeah, from the
Yeah,
farm,
right.
right. Um,
Pastured chicken. Pastured, right? That's what it is.
pasture raised, right, right.
Okay.
So in other words, the chickens run around in a field and they collect bugs and they eat
Yeah,
whatever they want and they get lots of
right.
exercise. Now, this does not necessarily make for a fatter chicken, but it makes for a better chicken. It makes for really good meat, makes for a happier chicken. Um, anyway, I'm getting slightly off subject, but I just wanted to
Yeah.
talk about good food and what makes quality food and the concept of quality. And this is what we focused on at Dean and DeLuca and at many other specialty stores around the country
And
and
here
around the
today,
world.
me,
But
and that's what
yeah,
I do
and
too.
today it's on the rise again. The idea that, when you eat factory food, when you eat food that comes out of a machine or that is processed in a way that just takes a lot of shortcuts and a lot of cheating and a lot of drugs, a lot of chemicals, a lot of additives, you're losing something. You're losing that connection to the earth that that I think is so important for our health and for the health of the planet.
The planet,
And
yes,
and
agreed.
yes, it costs a little more. In most cases, it doesn't cost a great deal more, um, but it does require that you know how to cook. It requires, but let's go back to the idea of why is crappy food so cheap? Well, um,
Because
one
there's
of the
nothing in
reasons
it.
one of the reasons the
There's
meat
nothing
is
in it.
so cheap, one of the reasons you can buy a 99-cent hamburger at a fast food place is because of huge subsidies from the government to the beef industry. And when I say the beef industry, I'm not talking about people that supply meat for Berkeley Bowl and Monterey Market and local butcher and places like that. I'm talking about giant ranches in the middle of the state that grow beef, that pack they grow the beef and then they pack them into feedlots and overfeed them corn, which is not really designed. Cows are not meant to eat corn, and they hit them up with hormones to make them grow faster. And because they're packed into the feedlots, they're for months. They, it's just like kids in a school. If somebody gets sick, they all get
Right,
sick. So
right,
what
right,
do?
right, right.
They routinely hit them all up with antibiotics so that to nip it in the bud. And um, you know, this makes for very inexpensive meat, but it's not meat that you should be eating. This is meat that's
Right,
full of
exactly, right.
chemicals.
Yeah,
It's very low on flavor, and
yeah,
you know, you get what you pay for. And when you pay
correct.
for a 99-cent hamburger, you get a 99-cent hamburger. You get a hamburger that's probably got a lot of filling in it. It's got a lot of hormones and chemicals in it.
Can be
There's
good.
even there's even
That
been
cannot
there
that cannot
there
be
are
good
even
then.
there are even theories that kids reach puberty faster these days because of all the
Yeah,
hormones they eat in the
yeah,
meat. And
that's crazy.
antibiotics don't work anymore because there's so much
Right?
antibiotics
Yeah,
pumped into the meat from factory farming that
yeah, it's crazy.
it just affects our health.
Yeah.
And I know I'm maybe a bit of a tree hugger, but I care about the
Tree,
welfare of animals. I don't have a problem eating meat. I have a problem with animals being tortured for their entire life and living in misery.
exactly, exactly, exactly.
And granted, if they grow up that way, they don't know the difference. They don't know that there's any other way to live. They're
Well,
not
you don't
very
think about
intelligent. But
we can't
but
we can't. Yeah,
but
yeah.
they still suffer, and they
Right.
live a
The suffering
miserable
is
life. Cows should be happy. Chickens should be happy. They should do what cows and chickens do, and pigs and
yeah.
rabbits and lambs. They should be able to frolic and live their lives, cohabitate with their flock or their herd, and then one day they become our food, and
Yep, yep.
it's
And you have to
okay.
understand that these animals process food that we can't eat, so we're not competing.
Right, right. Yeah, when the settlers first came west, they discovered millions of acres of grass, which did them no good at all. But you put a cow out there, and that cow can turn that grass into high quality meat and milk and
And take
other
care of the
things,
soil, and also take
and
care of the
take care
soil.
of the soil. Right, right.
So I get that. Yeah, that's anyway.
Okay,
So why is food why is cheap food so cheap then, Chef? I mean, it's because it's made in large quantities
made in
with
large
very
quantities.
inexpensive product, right?
Right. And they use substandard ingredients. They use a lot of fillers. So, I mean, a lot of fast food burgers are full of other things besides meat often because, it bulks it out. Um, and a lot of the things in a grocery store, as we've talked about before, it's really a very limited choice. Everything's either corn or oats, it they just process it in different ways. They package it in different ways and put it out there and sell it for food. And it's the emperor's new clothes. What is
Yeah.
Kenny saying? That we messed it up anyway with things like barbed wire and water rights. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, sure. Um, so the next question was, when did all this happen? Why,
Yeah, so the question is when did we start to notice a difference between, different foods. Because in the old days there was food. That's it, right? I mean,
Right.
then there's
Yeah.
the rich people and the poor people. Poor people didn't eat meat. Rich people ate meat. That's kind of the difference here, right? And the
Right.
quality, if it's spoiled, old,
Right. And rich people also, uh, I mean, poor people, if they had chickens and they had a cow, they probably were selling the milk and the eggs to make money enough to buy bread. So, which is
right?
ironic, but rich people,
You know,
they ate a lot of eggs, they ate a lot of meat, they ate a lot of milk and cheese. Also, rich people back then had access to things that were imported.
we're talking
Uh,
about that, guys, because it's actually a subject of it was true. There's really the poor people and then the Lord. That's it. There's no difference. There was no middle class at the time. Middle class came later. Middle class came in the medieval time after that, like 1500 or 1400. But before that, there was the poor, most of them, and that's it. And the rich, few of them. So that's what
right.
we talked about. It's not like it's anyway.
Right. And the difference in the food, basically, like we said, was a
Right.
difference in uh, poor people had, it was the same food, it was just they had very little of it, whereas the rich people had as much food as they wanted. They had unlimited access to food, basically. If you lived in the court, you ate meat every day, you ate cheese every day, you
Yeah.
had lots of good food. They probably didn't eat a lot of vegetables because that wasn't a
No,
big thing back then,
no,
but
but you understand that
if there
you
were
have to
any
understand.
vegetables to eat, the rich would have had them, not the poor.
Well, it's a different thing. They would eat the top and the poor eat the bottom. So
Right.
anything that's above the ground is heavenly. So the closer to the sky, to God, the closer the food was interesting. The birds, the pate, the birds pate, the strawberries, raspberries, and the apples and the pears were like. But anything under carrots, apple, potatoes, and nuts were
Potatoes.
considered evil because it was under the ground. So the
Closer to
difference were
hell.
there, yeah, which is where we live.
No, we live in heaven. Hell is like I don't know, some urban area. Let them
Yeah,
eat cake.
let them eat.
Yeah.
I don't know, you guys. This is not. This is kind of maybe a fake story. I mean, yes, Marie Antoinette was very. Anyway, that's a completely different story. She was. Yeah, I don't want to
But
continue
it's a
that.
good example. That's another thing that the poor probably didn't have a lot of was cake, because to make cake you have to have really finely ground flour, and you have to have sugar and other
Which is yeah,
flavorings, and they
yeah,
just,
which is
that would have been such a luxury in the Middle
oh yeah,
Ages that nobody was making cakes. They were lucky if they could bake bread, and their bread was probably very crude and very coarse because they
different
didn't
flour.
have
Black.
means of grinding it finely and all that
There
stuff,
was
and
there
different
was
flour.
there was black bread, white bread. The black bread for the poor, and the whole and the white, very refined bread. The white bread was for the rich people or the newly the so there was a middle class that was growing in the medieval time, and those are the people that had excess food that could sell. So
Right.
it started with excess food that started when the war starting to slow down.
Right. And white bread was considered uh uh
Pure and
fancier. It was
beautiful, yeah,
considered
yeah,
pure and better,
yeah,
and
yeah,
anything like a dark coarse bread was, that was only for the peasants, or you'd feed it to the
yeah,
animals. You
right, yeah.
um, they used to have a joke in the UK that oats were something that the English fed to their horses and the Scots fed to themselves. I mean,
Yeah,
the people
right.
ate it, and in England the horses eat it. Um,
And we eat the horse.
we eat the horse. Yeah. So I
What is
think,
what is it? What is it? Kenny want? What does he want?
what is he talking about? He made lasagna
Um,
recently.
good
Did you
point.
save us any? Why
Yeah,
aren't there more zero flour products
yeah.
being milled in the U.S.? Well,
I don't know.
I maybe there's no demand for it. I don't know. I know they're starting to import some flours from Italy that are not only uh, not only ground in a certain way and stone ground, but they're made from old traditional strains of wheat. So they're a lot better for you. Probably have, probably people that have a wheat intolerance can eat those wheats. I don't know. I'm not an expert on that,
I
but
don't think so. It's just double zero has more protein. It's for bread and stuff that are
right.
way more protein. So I don't know. This is more for pizzas and stuff like that, right?
Right, and I think most Americans buy all-purpose flour that they
Yeah,
can
and
make cakes and cookies
yeah,
and all that
and,
stuff. Um, I think bread baking and pasta making is uh, it's not something that everyone does. I saw someone on
yeah.
television the other day who was making fresh pasta, and she said, "I just don't understand why people don't make more pasta. Why people don't make their own pasta? It's so easy." And I thought,
Oh,
well, yeah, I guess if you like fresh pasta
yeah,
and you eat a lot of it, then yeah, why not make it yourself? It's not that hard to make, but I just don't eat that much pasta. So,
yeah, right. To start with, right? Exactly, right.
so when did
And a
all
good,
this
and
happen?
yeah. So
Well,
yeah,
I think
when is the shift?
World War
What?
II was a big turning point in the food industry because suddenly the government had to supply food for millions of soldiers overseas, and they had to feed these guys. I mean, that's always been the trouble with going to war is you got to you got to feed your soldiers, and you
Yeah,
have to
but
feed them well because you want
I
them to be
understand.
strong and be able to hike and fight. And
I understand, but James, one of the food that they were using was corned beef, which is really good food. So I don't,
well, but they were also
right?
they were also making a lot of pre-made meals
Yeah,
that would get shipped over there that could be eaten quickly and on the
yeah,
on the road.
right.
And it was
But
sort
it
of
was,
a well, I'm not saying it was bad in itself. I'm
yeah,
just saying it's a precursor
yeah, right,
to what happened later when they
right.
developed these technologies like freeze drying was developed by the military.
Oh
A
wow,
lot of these pre-made meal things were made by the military, and other preservation techniques and other food cooking techniques where they could cook a great deal of food quickly and efficiently and as cheaply as possible because we're talking about massive amounts of food. And
right, right,
not
right,
only
right.
was it massive amounts of food, but it had to be shipped halfway around the world to where the soldiers were and where they were
And
fighting
preserved and not go bad.
and not go bad. They had to be able to sit in a
Oh,
warehouse
right,
in
right, right, right.
England somewhere or
And then in a bag for a few
France.
days. In a bag for a
Yeah,
few days. I mean, that's the thing. That food cannot go bad, right? You can't kill your. I mean, who was that? Napoleon, who says an army walks on his stomach,
right,
right?
exactly. And a lot of these guys would hike into situations where they didn't have kitchens, they didn't have refrigerators, so they had to be able to take food in with, just like a backpacker now. You have to be able to take food in
Right.
with you that will stay good and that you can make easily over a campfire or whatever.
We done that.
Something
Um,
similar with tea in China. What's he talking
I
about?
need.
Tea in China.
I think he's drunk.
I think I think Kenny's
Spam.
I think Oh, spam.
I
Spam,
need,
yeah, spam was probably a product
Jimbo, I'm gonna
originally
wash
of.
my hand. 1 minute. I'll be right back. Don't worry.
Okay, yeah,
Sorry.
wash
I
them
thought it was.
thoroughly now.
Oh my
So
God.
then after World War II, when the GIs were coming home and America was transforming, people were moving to the suburbs.
Right.
We were building interstate highways and big ass cars, and America was on the move. People were moving around. They weren't necessarily staying in the same
Right.
place they grew up, and they
Crazy.
were going to where the work was, but they were also getting married, and they wanted a certain lifestyle. They wanted a certain ease of life, and this whole concept of labor saving became very prevalent amongst middle class families. And so what did that mean? Well, it meant vacuum cleaners and washing machines for one thing, to
Oh yeah.
reduce the amount of labor that the housewife would have to do while her man was off earning a
Yeah.
living, but it also meant food that was a lot more convenient to cook, food that could keep for a long time. So you could go to the grocery store on Saturday afternoon and you could buy a week's worth of food that would be put in the cupboard or the refrigerator or the freezer, and that every day you could just pull out food and prepare it and serve it. So this meant a lot of things in packages, a lot of freeze dried food, a lot of dried food. Um, and so and cost was always an issue. So the food industry, which took its cue from the military, started taking these techniques and experimenting and coming up with ways to make food cheaper and cheaper and cheaper.
Right. And
um,
now we're stuck with that idea
right.
that food is cheap.
And ironically, they were spending very little to produce the actual food, but they were spending millions of dollars on marketing and advertising. So, you started having, and then especially with the advent of radio and then television,
Right.
suddenly
Right.
they were, television ads, which were very expensive and are still very expensive. I mean, if you read about just the marketing budget for Coca-Cola alone is, billions of dollars. I mean,
I know.
just
It's
think
crazy.
about how much everywhere you go, you see billboards for Coke and television commercials and all kinds of ad
Oh
campaigns.
man, that's crazy.
And what does a can of Coke cost? I'm not even sure I know
Oh,
anymore, but it can't be more than a
wow.
couple bucks.
What?
And
So the cost? No, no. The cost
no, the price
is
that you buy a can of Coke for, I don't know what
it's
it
super
is.
cheap. No, it's super
It's a
cheap. I mean,
it's a
like you buy
buck.
a whole box for like a couple of bucks. It's just
Yeah,
weird. You know what I mean?
yeah.
It's like,
And so you figure that, you know, uh, probably 80% of that price of that Coke goes to marketing to sell more
oh,
Coke.
at
It's
least.
crazy. But that's how they became the biggest brand in the world. And anyway, so that's what happened. And then also in the 50s, another thing happened that was really sad, was that people stopped passing down the art of cooking to their kids
Oh
because
wow.
they
Yeah.
weren't cooking. They were putting everything in a microwave, or they were
Hmm.
opening a
When?
package. I
Hey,
mean, when
when
you
did the
make
mic?
if you're gonna make dinner rolls, you don't start with flour and butter and whatever. You take a little tube out of the refrigerator and you smack it on the counter and it
Crazy.
opens up, and you just put them out on a pan and bake them. So, a whole generation of people grew up not knowing how to cook and not having no idea of what real food was, not even knowing really where food came from.
Right. That's also what is food? I mean, for them it was
Yeah,
just a, and
yeah,
so in where I was raised, we had access to, the farm. We saw all the food coming. We spent time on the farm with everybody in the family, right? So
right, right.
we have a clue of what's going on. We can see that it's come from the ground, and we have to do this before the food comes. I mean, there's work behind it, right? It's not just, and now you go to the store, so there's no more work. The only work you do, you work for someone else,
Right.
and then he's giving you something so you
They
can buy
they
your
give you
food,
money so you can go to the store and
right? But
buy
that's
food.
not, yeah, it's a little bit different, right?
Right. I grew up in I guess, a
Oh
lower
yeah, right.
middle class family in the Midwest, and so I was also subject to this. We ate a lot of supermarket food and all that stuff, but um, I want a full book report by next week, Kenny.
And Monday would be
Um,
great.
but I was lucky in that I had family still on farms in Iowa. And so we would go visit them a lot, especially in the summertime. I spent a lot of time on my cousin's farm in the summer.
Yeah, right.
It was my aunt and uncle's farm, and then it got passed down to their kids. And so I sort of learned about the food chain. I saw, the chickens were running around, and there was a garden, and there were cows, and we milked the cows, and we had the milk
Right.
right out of the
Yeah,
cow. And
exactly. It's like, and you never worry about the food that you got, right? Because it
right,
was fresh and it was clean.
right.
It was not taken somewhere else by some people and repackaged and served back to you in a different whatever, right? So that's
Yeah,
the
when
idea.
when I was a kid, my aunt and uncle, they never, if they wanted fried chicken or if they wanted a roast chicken for dinner, they didn't go to the supermarket. They went to
Right.
the backyard. They went out and they picked the chicken, and They butchered it, and it was as simple as that. And it was a never-ending cycle because the chickens would lay eggs, some of which they would eat, but some of which they would allow to, hatch, and then they'd have new chicks, and so there were always more chickens. They were always raising chickens. They had dozens and dozens of chickens at any given time.
Yeah, right.
Uh,
So I bet you, and I'm sorry to, I bet you this is one of those, the egg with the golden egg. You
the
seen
goose with
remember
the
that
golden egg,
story?
yeah, yeah,
So that's a cool story because basically it shows you that you can keep the chicken and keep having food, right? Or you can eat the whole chicken and we're done,
right.
right?
Right. Well, the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, where they're so poor and they're so hungry that she finally sends Jack off with the cow
Yeah, right.
to sell the cow because
Oh, I
they just
know.
can't
Right,
afford to
right,
keep it anymore. And Jack
right.
trades it for some magic beans and comes home, and his mother has a fit. She's like, What the hell, you?" And he goes, "But
But
these
that's
are
not
magic beans."
that's another story, right?
Yeah, that's
Different
Jack and the
story. Yeah,
Beanstalk. But then there's the goose with the golden egg. I forget the whole plot of it, but yeah,
yeah,
it's
I know. It's
basically
just because the guy, the chicken or the goose or whatever, was making golden eggs, and then he wanted to have more, so he killed the chicken or the goose to see all the eggs that's inside, but there was no more eggs.
right,
Darn it!
right. It's like it reminds me of the story of Midas, who wanted. He was so greedy for gold that he wanted to have a golden touch, so that anything he touched would turn to gold. And so he got his wish, and it was great. He was suddenly fabulously wealthy, but of course he was screwed because he couldn't eat, because if he touched the food it turned to gold. If he touched his
Oh,
wife, she turned to,
right.
so anything
Oh
he
my
touched
God,
turned to
that is
gold. So
crazy.
suddenly
Yeah,
suddenly
yeah,
even though he was the richest man in the world, he had nothing.
yeah. That's funny.
Which I think is a great metaphor for most rich people, because I've often thought that money is wasted on the rich. But
There's there
so
was this there was this great quote, Jeff. I mean, it's kind of stupid. It's like, do you want to know what God thinks about money? Look who he gave it to.
it's true. It's true.
That's funny.
Yes, youth is wasted on the young and money is wasted on the rich. I'm sure of it.
That's funny.
Um, So a few years ago, Dean and DeLuca basically came to an end. The last one closed. It was a very sad thing. It had
When
been
was that?
sold. Well, the last store closed, I don't know, a year or so before COVID,
Oh
I think.
wow.
And
Wow. Oh my
it was
God.
the store that I helped open on Broadway in New
Jesus.
York that was the flagship store, and it was the
So it's
last
recent.
one standing. And a lot of people were
Wow.
writing about it at the time, and some people actually took great delight in the demise of Dean and DeLuca because they saw it as
Wow.
this bastion for the rich. They thought of it as a
Yeah,
food museum. They
understood.
thought of it as only serving the elite, and it's very
Right. Yeah.
expensive. And it really made me angry. And I wrote an essay about it that I never got published, but it was a response to all that. And basically what I said was that we never saw Dean and DeLuca that way. We saw it as a market, plain and simple. But what we sold was traditional foods, mostly from Europe in the beginning, more and more from domestic produced, as the cottage food industry grew in America and was coming back. But we had a lot of imported food, but they were all traditional foods made with traditional methods,
Right.
traditional
Right.
ingredients.
So
Um,
you would never serve in there, like, I don't know, like,
Processed cheese,
right,
or
right, 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 right.
uh, you know um, hamburger helper and things like that. We sold real food, and we had pasta, but our pasta was of the highest quality,
Yeah, right, right, right.
and you could taste the difference. I mean, it was great, and it wasn't that much more expensive. I mean, it was I don't know, $4 a pound instead of 250 a pound or something. So
Yeah,
yes, it was more
exactly. That
expensive, but
right,
it
that's
was
the
so
idea.
much worth it. Anyway, I wrote this whole response that, and what happened in the end at Dean and DeLuca is the people that ended up owning it at the end was some rich family from, I forget where they were from. They were from the Middle East or somewhere. I can't remember, or Southeast Asia somewhere. But they were a very, very the one in St. Helena closed long ago. That was one of the first to go when the company
Oh
started having
wow.
trouble.
Oh
But
wow.
the family that
Mhm.
owned it at the end, they saw it as these critics saw it. They thought it was this glittering jewel of a food museum, and they wanted to make it extremely exclusive, and they just didn't get it. They just didn't get it, and they drove it into the ground. And the result was that it finally closed, and now it's gone forever. So,
Wow.
um, I mean, it doesn't matter. It spawned many imitations, and so now now there are gourmet stores all over the country that do really good work. But it just irritated me that people just didn't get it. They just, yes, there was expensive food there. We sold caviar and foie gras and um, uh, you know certain cheeses that were very expensive, but it wasn't all we
But
sold.
okay, wait. So first of all, we didn't talk about why is it expensive because of course people, if you don't know, you're wondering why would you pay more for something that's completely understandable. But once you understand that actually you're paying less per pound for good food because you actually have more nutrients. So
Right,
this is kind of, you're buying really crappy stuff for cheap, but there's nothing in it. So
right.
per weight of nutrients, the good food is cheaper, but it's a lot to
Well,
like.
let's look at an example. Let's look at pasta for an example, because that was a really kind of signature product at Dina DeLuca, because we were, unquestionably, our product selection leaned towards Italy, because there were
Yeah,
so many
right,
great
right, right.
products from Italy.
Hmm.
I mean, we loved French food, but there weren't as many products that we could get from
Right,
France, at least the
right.
ones that were legal to bring in. So there was a ton of stuff from Italy: cheeses, meats, and pasta. Pasta was kind of I don't know. It was almost like the logo of Dina and DeLuca, not literally, but so why was our pasta more expensive, and why would you want to pay that for that pasta? Well,
Yeah,
let's look at how it's made. And this is another question we had: what's the difference between fresh and dried pasta, except for the obvious that one's dried and one, and the question sort of says, well, why is it called fresh pasta when you buy fresh pasta, it's clearly dried? But so what's the difference between that and dry
right.
pasta? So I'll talk about that in the context of this subject. Let's talk about dry pasta first. Dry pasta is uh, typically made by, you make the dough and it's just flour and water. It's semolina flour and water and salt, and it's usually put through an extruder. So there's extruders that make long, thin pieces of pasta, which is, spaghetti, fettuccine, that sort of thing. And then there are extruders that make shapes like penne and different kinds of macaroni. Um, Now, when you make when you make really good traditional pasta, there are two things that are very important. First of all, the quality of the flour and the type of flour that's used. They use a hard durum wheat. It's called semolina, and it it holds up better. It dries better when the pasta is uh, finally cooked. It holds up better. It keeps its shape.
It doesn't break down like it.
Doesn't
It
break
doesn't.
down.
Yeah, it doesn't disappear in your pot, right?
And then the second most important thing is how the pasta is extruded. In a lot of modern pasta factories that want to produce huge amounts of pasta, and this is very true in the United States, not so much in Italy, although there's more and more of it in Italy all the time. They use Teflon dies. So the result is the pasta goes through very quickly. You can produce shitloads of pasta very quickly, faster than you can with more traditional pasta makers. Use these brass
Yes,
dies that are very
right.
rough in texture.
Which
And the
are so they
result,
are more difficult to make.
yeah,
They are usually
it's
artisanal
slower.
make, right?
It's a slower process.
Right.
But the result is you get a pasta that has some texture to it.
Yeah.
So it holds sauces better. It stays together better. Um, and then the third most important thing is how it's dried. And in a big commercial company that wants to produce tons and tons of pasta, they have machines that can dry the pasta in a matter of hours.
Wow.
And it's just high heat, blast the pasta, dries it very
Otherwise,
quickly, goes into a package, and it's out the door. So you can make pasta literally in a day. You can make it in the morning, fly it through these Teflon dyes, goes to the ovens, 4 or 5 hours, it's dry in the package. The next day, it's on a truck headed for the port or
so
wherever.
what happened to the traditional pasta? How long does it take to make
Well,
in a position?
originally, when they made dried pasta, it would take several days to dry.
Ah, okay.
Now, that's a little too long for most
Okay.
commercial makers because they want to make it in a traditional way, but they also want to make a profit. So they have kilns that dry the pasta in like instead of a couple of hours, it takes maybe a day to dry the pasta. So 24 hours or something like that. So
Okay. Right.
it's a
Right.
much longer. It's somewhere between hanging it on a rack in the attic and letting it dry and blasting it with high heat in a furnace. There's a middle ground where they dry the pasta much slower. Now, what's important about that? When you dry it slower, what happens is the pasta holds together better. So when you cook the
Right.
pasta, it's going to
Right.
keep its shape. So if you cook, you get a really good imported Italian dried pasta, and you cook it in boiling water and you strain it off. It's got texture. It keeps its shape. It holds a sauce. Sauce will cling to it. It's got flavor because the wheat is so much better, and it's just more enjoyable to eat because of the texture in your mouth. It's just everything about it is better. Um, and if you ever buy like really cheap American pasta or macaroni, as they call it, it falls apart and it's very mushy and it has virtually no flavor. The only flavor you get from it is what you add to it. So that's why I think my theory is that's why macaroni and cheese became so big in this country, because the
Ah,
pasta was
okay.
so tasteless that you had
Right.
to do something to it. Or you dump
God.
tomato sauce on it or whatever you do. But you notice when you buy cheap pasta and you pour tomato sauce on it, you'll notice that when
I
if
know.
you
Right.
pick the pasta out of the sauce is all gone. So you have to almost get it with a spoon to get sauce and pasta at the same time.
So I have a question for you actually. That this is good. Um, so you said the less quality pasta, people put more seasoning. Is
Right.
that so?
Yeah,
Tomato
you
sauce
have to you have
exists,
to add something to it because it doesn't taste like anything.
right? So
Um,
tomato sauce existed, right? Before. I mean, that's
Sure, and they use tomato sauce in Italy too. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing wrong with all these sauces that go on pasta. It's just that good pasta should taste good on its own. And a lot of people in Italy, pasta is a course, a first course, and it's just
okay.
usually it's just olive oil and cheese or butter and cheese
Right, 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 right.
and salt and pepper, and it's delicious. And that's why when you buy really good pasta, and again, we're not talking about a lot of money here. You buy something like Martelli or Rusticella. Rusticella is very widely available here in the Bay Area because the importer is here. Um, any of these good Italian pastas, you can cook it, toss it in a little olive oil, a little cracked black pepper, maybe some dried red pepper flakes, something like that. It's delicious. A little grated Parmesan cheese on it. It's fantastic. Um, Cheap pasta, just you can't do that. It just doesn't taste like anything, and it's mushy, and I don't even know why anybody bothers. Um, so what's the difference between dry pasta and fresh pasta? Well, fresh pasta typically comes from the north of Italy. It's made with egg. It's made with a softer wheat, usually a summer wheat, and it's a different type of pasta. It used different sauces. And yes, you do dry it, because you have to dry it, because if you cook it, if you make fresh pasta and just immediately throw it into boiling water, it's not going to hold up. So you do have to
So
dry it. You want to get rid of the moisture out of the pasta before you cook it so that it'll hold its shape and texture.
so it's
Um,
dried, but not dried like
it's not dried
entirely.
like the macaroni in the south of Italy that is completely dry. There's no moisture left in it at all.
Oh, okay.
Um, and the biggest difference is the pasta in the north is made with egg. Traditionally, the north of Italy was always more prosperous than the south, so they made they made fresh pasta with eggs. They made heavy meat sauces, bolognese, ragouts. Um, they used Parmigiano Reggiano and butter. In the South, it was more pecorino and olive oil. And if meat was used at all in a sauce, it was used to like flavor the sauce. They would cook a little pancetta or something, a cheap cut of meat, and then, but they didn't really eat the meat. It was just to flavor the other things in the sauce. So, I mean, those are stereotypes kind of, but they at one time they very much existed. I mean, the South was very poor, the North
Okay.
was much more prosperous.
Okay. Right. So that's the difference. So that would explain the egg in the north and the no eggs in the south. I mean, that's how it started, right?
Right,
So basically, the
right,
pasta is divided in the rich and the poor.
right,
The rich people has eggs to put in there, and
right.
the
They
poor
use
people
more
don't have.
butter in the North, olive oils. In the South, the land was dry and rough and rugged. So what did they grow? They grew goats, they grew olives, um, and that's what could thrive, and pigs to a certain extent, but goats were really great because goats can thrive on that kind of terrain. And of course they relied on the sea a lot, so a lot of seafood. um, in the north they had pasture land. Much of it was reclaimed from marshes, but they had pastures so they could grow beef cattle. uh, and consequently, because they could grow cattle, they also had a lot more milk, so they made butter and cheese, cow's milk cheeses, which were much heavier, fattier, richer. Um, and they,
And then, so that's when, I mean, it just triggers another question. So, and I know it's not the subject, but so that's buffalo mozzarella, right? That's
well, that's from the South. Those are water buffaloes, and that was a traditional cheese in the South that was used. I mean, most famously on the pizzas. Um, but yeah, it was, water buffaloes were raised more inland, but in the sort of swampy areas, and they also could thrive. Um, you had to be more prosperous to own a water buffalo than a goat or a sheep. Um,
what about oxes? That was cows, oxes, all this. What does that come from? I mean, is that they had that also, and they had buffaloes, right?
I suppose, yeah, those are used more for labor, for pulling the plow and that sort of thing. But it's also why uh, the quote unquote gourmet industry began with things like dried pasta and dried grating cheeses, tomato sauces, all that stuff. Because the first immigrants from Italy, well, where did they come from? Well, naturally, they came from the poorer part of Italy. If you were the prosperous person in the north, why would you immigrate to America? You made your money here, you thrived. But the people in the south, I mean, they had very little. They were often starving to death. And so they would head to America for a better life. And what did they take with them? They took with them their traditional foods, which was dry
Mm,
pasta, grating cheese, um, um, uh, tomato-based sauces, which they perfected, and so those became sort of the basis of what we think of now as the gourmet industry. Originally, it was just sold in ethnic markets in inner city areas where the Italians were. So if you wanted those products, 50 years ago, you had to go to an Italian neighborhood, and Little Italy in New York, or there's still a great Italian enclave
right.
in St. Louis and Seattle, lots of
Little bit
places,
here,
Philadelphia.
Little bit here, San Francisco.
Here, yeah, San Francisco. Um, kind of was the beginning of the coffee industry because they started, they were coffee roasters, um, and we still have remnants of it. Molinari, the meats, and there's a lot of great Italian traditions in San Francisco that's still there. The sourdough bread even was. So anyway, it eventually grew and evolved, and people like Joel Dean and Giorgio De Luca started, gathering these things and selling them in their market to everyone.
Right.
And they sort of taught people about food while they were merchants, but they had to educate people about what these foods were and why they were important, why they were delicious. Um,
So it took some education and time, right? I mean, it's not like
yeah,
that's because I remember when
it
I
took a
first got
long time.
to LA was when I was young. I was like, so it was in the 82, literally 82. And I would start to work in restaurant and some of the title in the restaurant was like gourmet chicken, whatever. And
Yeah.
I was like, it was crappy food, super crappy. But because they put a sauce in it, like the Dijon, oh my God, the chicken Dijon. Oh my God. It was like so basic, it's like it's so disgusting. Chicken breast with a crappy Dijon sauce, which is like basically they only did is Dijon and cream and put that on that. And it was just, it's not even cooked. It was just, oh God. And they could get gourmet, right? Because they've never had that. Because traditionally it's chicken and barbecue. So because of the switch, now it's gourmet.
Right. And a lot of the things in restaurant industry was a great example of how they learned how to make food cheaper to sell to the public, and a lot of it was based on traditional stuff, but they either didn't understand it completely or they didn't want to take the time, so they would just do
They
like
had no
fast food
clue.
versions
No,
of
they had
it,
no
you know.
clue. They had no clue. The chef was trying to figure out what, because there was not many people from Europe in restaurants. There was a few, but not like it was not like today. Today you have tons of people from Europe. They can help, you know. And also today now everybody knows how to cook. I mean, not. I'm sorry. Lots of people know how to cook in every country. People choose not to, but that's different. But in the day where there was only few French people, very little Italian people in the 80s in LA. So we were the stars. We could work anywhere because we had this knowledge. I mean,
Yeah, and French
it
food
changed.
was sort of the epitome
Oh yeah,
of fine dining, and it
yeah,
certainly was the language of the kitchen and
oh, yeah.
uh, all the techniques, all the styles of cooking. And as American chefs began to be trained that way, like the Culinary Institute of
Yeah,
America, the
exactly
French
right.
French Institute in New York,
Cordon
they were
bleu, all this
teaching,
stuff, right?
yeah, they were teaching classic French techniques.
Yeah,
So
right, right.
these chefs suddenly they knew how to make these traditional foods, and then many of them started going to Italy to
Yeah,
experiment and finding
exactly
out
right.
the roots of some of these
What it tastes
traditional
like.
Italian
I mean,
dishes.
you want to know what it tastes like. I mean,
Right.
it's one thing to know how to do a dish, but you really have to know how it tastes when it's good. So if you do something here with different product, it won't taste the same. So you cannot be happy because you deliver the technique. You need to be happy because you delivered the flavor, the taste.
Right. And then now it's evolved even further. So a lot of the really bright young chefs, they're rediscovering their own
Yeah, yeah,
culinary roots in America. They're
exactly.
bringing back
Which is
traditional
great.
American dishes, but doing them at a
Yeah,
very high
fantastic.
level. They're
Great.
also, they're learning how to be butchers and charcutiers, and so it's a really exciting time for, and then COVID hit, which kind of ground everything to a halt, but it's all happening again. And there's just so many people that care about food, that are
Yeah,
taking the time to do
yeah.
things in a traditional way. All
Yep.
right.
All right, man. Two more
Well,
minutes. So, yep,
what
that's it.
else do we have to say? Yeah, it's interesting that
You
we've
pay,
talked about.
we always say the same thing. You get what you pay for. That's so true in any field. There's
Yeah.
not one field that is different. I mean, I don't know. Do you know one field that's different? I mean, could be
No.
anything, right? It's a rule that is golden rule,
Right.
isn't it? I mean,
Yeah, it's
You buy
amazing.
like even a product, even a class, even a product. I mean, I mean, of course, our classes are expensive because everything is crazy expensive right now. But I have to pay rent. My kitchen is beautiful. I buy the top quality food that I can. I always replace my tools, and when they get broken, we have to replace it. So this costs a lot of money. But then people come and they're very happy to come to a Kitchen on Fire because they they can see where the money is going. It's not like you
Right.
end up in a room with like two burners and shitty. No, no, we do, we charge, but we offer like a super service. This is why people come here. And also the virtual, if I do virtual, and you can see, I have all my tools, my cameras, so it's quality. So people pay for quality investment and the knowledge
Right.
and what we deliver. Yeah, anyway.
And of course, the restaurant scene is a very different thing. When you go to a restaurant, there are restaurants that serve much better food today. It's expensive because at a restaurant,
Oh,
you're not just
thank you.
paying for the food. The food is almost the least of it. You're paying rent. You're paying rent on
Oh,
that
yeah.
seat at that table.
The staff,
They've
the
got the overhead on a restaurant, especially a fine dining restaurant, which is why there are fewer
insane.
and fewer fine dining restaurants opening these days. Um, I think the restaurant industry is shifting towards, self-service,
Yeah,
counter service, that sort
yeah.
of thing, which makes a lot of
Because
sense. But
you
there,
can't afford this.
some people still like the experience of going in and
Oh
sitting down at a
yeah.
white tablecloth,
Ah yeah,
having
absolutely.
everything brought to you, being
Yeah.
waited on hand and foot. But you got to pay for that. So
Exactly. You have to
you know you
accept,
can
right?
you
Accept.
can eat that way at home by learning how to cook. You can go and you can buy really good food and still not spend a fraction of what you'd spend in a restaurant,
Right.
because you're not paying salaries, you're not paying the electric bill, you're not paying for, like you said, all the equipment, the replacing of equipment,
So
the insurance, taxes, all that stuff.
constant
uh,
changing regulation. Anyway, so we gotta go soon. Not you,
do we
James.
have
You can
to
stay.
do
You
we
you
have
can
to
stay.
I'm going to sit right here until next week. So, and
Yeah, that's
Kenny
what
will
you.
be expecting that book report. I wish you still lived out here, Kenny, because you keep telling us all this great food you're making, but
I know, right?
you're
Yeah.
in bloody New Hampshire. We can't taste it. I guess I'll just have to come to New Hampshire and visit. I'm assuming I have a room there if I come.
Oh, my food is done. So you guys, just so you know, what I've done. Bunch of chicken, ground meat, in onion, shallots, garlic, with a little Madeira. That's all. It's pretty cool, huh? And
Yeah.
that's ready to go. That's pretty nice. Done. This is recycled. Now I can eat the whole week. There's a bunch of spices in there. I added Madeira and tons of spices. All right, people.
Très bien.
Great.
Très bien, as they say in Vietnam.
Yeah, they say that. Are you sure?
Yeah, they do.
All right, people. Thank
All right.
you. See you next
Thanks for
week.
joining us. We'll be back. Look for us at your